leisure and fashion, Esther spent 5 useful years, coming back to her fond father's soldier roof a winsome picture of girlish health and grace and comeliness, a girl who could ride, walk, and run if need be, who could bake and cook, mend and sew, cut, fashion, and make her own simple wardrobe, who knew algebra, geometry, and trig quite as well as, and history, geography, and grammar far better than, most of the young West Pointers. A girl who spoke her own tongue with accuracy and was not badly versed in French. A girl who performed fairly well on the piano and guitar, but who sang full-throated, rejoiceful, exulting, like the lark, the soulful music that brought delight to her aging father, half crippled by the wounds of the war days, and to the mother who so devotedly loved and carefully planned for her. Within a month from her graduation at Madame Piatt's, she had become the darling of Fort Frayne, the pet of many a household, the treasure of her own. With other young gallants of the garrison, Beverly Field had been prompt to call, prompt to be her escort when dance or drive, ride or picnic was planned in her honor, especially the ride, for Mr. Adjutant Field loved the saddle, the open prairie, or the bold, undulating bluffs. But Field was the busiest man at the post. Other youngsters, troop or company subalterns, had far more time at their disposal, and begged for rides and dances, strolls and sports which the post adjutant was generally far too busy to claim. It was Esther who brought lawn tennis to Frayne, and found eager pupils of both sexes, but Field had been the first to meet and welcome her, had been for a brief time at the start her most constant cavalier. Then, as others began to feel the charm of her frank, cordial, joyous manner, and learned to read the beauty that beamed in her clear, truthful eyes and winsome yet not beautiful face, they became assiduous in turn, two of them almost distressingly so, and she could not wound them by refusals. Then came a fortnight in which her father sat as a member of a court martial down at old Fort Laramie, where were the band, headquarters, and 4 troops of the th, and Captain and Mrs. Freeman, who were there stationed, begged that Mrs. Dade and Esther should come and visit them during the session of the court. There would be all manner of army gaieties and a crowd of outside officers, and, as luck would have it, Mr. Field was ordered thither as a witness in 2 important cases. The captain and his good wife went by stage. Esther and Beverly rode every inch of the way in saddle, camping overnight with their joyous little party at La Bonte. Then came a lovely week at Laramie, during which Mr. Field had little to do but devote himself to and dance with Esther. And when his final testimony was given and he returned to his station, and not until then, Esther Dade discovered that life had little interest or joy without him. But Field rode back unknowing, and met at Frayne, before Esther Dade's return, a girl who had come almost unheralded, making the journey over the Medicine Bow from Rock Springs on the Union Pacific in the comfortable carriage of old Bill Hay, the post trader, escorted by that redoubtable woman, Mrs. Bill Hay, and within the week of her arrival Nanette Flower was the toast of the bachelors' mess, the talk of every household at Fort Frayne. And well she might be. Dark and lustrous were her eyes, black, luxuriant, and lustrous was her hair, dark, rich, and lustrous her radiant beauty. In contour her face was well nigh faultless. It might have been called beautiful indeed but for the lips, or something about the mouth, that in repose had not a soft or winsome line, but then it was never apparently in repose. Smile, sunshine, animation, rippling laughter, flashing, even white teeth, these were what one noted when in talk with Miss Flower. There was something actually radiant, almost dazzling, about her face. Her figure, though petite, was exquisite, and women marked with keen appreciation, if not envy, the style and finish of her varied and various gowns. 6 trunks, said Billy Hay's boss teamster, had been trundled over the range from Rawlins, not to mention a box containing her little ladyship's beautiful English side saddle, Melton bridle, and other equine impedimenta. Did Miss Flower like to ride? She adored it, and Billy Hay had a bay half thoroughbred that could discount the major's mare cross country. All Frayne was out to see her start for her first ride with Beverly Field, and all Frayne reluctantly agreed that sweet Essie Dade could never sit a horse over a ditch or hurdle with the superb grace and unconcern displayed by the daring, dashing girl who had so suddenly become the center of garrison interest. For the first time in her life Mrs. Bill Hay knew what it was to hold the undivided attention of Army society, for every woman at Fort Frayne was wild to know all about the beautiful newcomer, and only one could tell. Hay, the trader, had prospered in his long years on the frontier, first as a trader among the Sioux, later as sutler, and finally, when Congress abolished that title, substituting therefor the euphemism, without material clog upon the prerequisites, as post trader at Fort Frayne. No one knew how much he was worth, for while apparently a most open-hearted, whole-souled fellow, Hay was reticence itself when his fortunes or his family were matters of question or comment. He had long been married, and Mrs. Hay, when at the post, was a social sphinx, kind-hearted, charitable, lavish to the soldiers' wives and children, and devotion itself to the families of the officers when sickness and trouble came, as come in the old days they too often did. It was she who took poor Ned Robinson's young widow and infant all the way to Cheyenne when the Sioux butchered the luckless little hunting party down by Laramie Peak. It was she who nursed Captain Forrest's wife and daughter through 10 weeks of typhoid, and with her own means sent them to the seashore, while the husband and father was far up on the Yellowstone, cut off from all communication in the big campaign of '76. It was she who built the little chapel and decked and dressed it for Easter and Christmas, despite the fact that she herself had been baptized in the Roman Catholic faith. It was she who went at once to every woman in the garrison whose husband was ordered out on scout or campaign, proffering aid and comfort, despite the fact long whispered in the garrisons of the Platte country that in the old, old days she had far more friends among the red men than the white. That could well be, because in those days white men were few and far between. Everyone had heard the story that it was through her the news of the massacre at Fort Phil Kearny was made known to the post commander, for she could speak the dialects of both the Arapahoe and the Sioux, and had the sign language of the plains veritably at her fingers' ends. There were not lacking those who declared that Indian blood ran in her veins, that her mother was an Ogallala squaw and her father a French Canadian fur trapper, a story to which her raven black hair and brows, her deep dark eyes and somewhat swarthy complexion gave no little color. But long years before, Bill Hay had taken her East, where he had relatives, and where she studied under excellent masters, returning to him summer after summer with more and more of refinement in manner, and so much of style and fashion in dress, that her annual advent had come to be looked upon as quite the event of the season, even by women of the social position of Mrs. Ray and Mrs. Blake, the recognized leaders among the young matrons of the Cavalry, and by gentle Mrs. Dade, to whom everyone looked up in respect, almost in reverence. Despite the mystery about her antecedents, there was